recognize you. I know you. Actually, I don't recognize you. I'm just looking at the camera here, and I don't really know who you are. I mean, you could be many people watching this. You could be someone that's not even in my class because I just am kind of like a cool YouTube star, and lots of people just watch my YouTube channel because I'm just so exciting and fun to watch. So at the end, please make sure you subscribe on the subscribe button and like. Just kidding. Seriously, you can subscribe. But seriously. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to look at chapter 6. So we are coming into the home stretch here of the story. Ellie and his father are leaving the concentration camp, and now, along with thousands of Jews, they are marching. And we're going to read through their marching here. So keep in mind that you can read along with the book. You can read along with the PDF, and you can make your screen larger and read along with me. My purpose in reading it to you, one, listening to the words get pronounced is helpful. Two, reading the flow of the story and hearing how it all fits together, it generally helps you comprehend and understand the story better. So my goal is not just to entertain you and read it to you, although it is a powerful story I want you to be aware of. Part of it is for you to hopefully be practicing your own reading and become better readers while we do this. So without further ado, let us continue. An icy wind was blowing violently, but we marched without faltering. The SS made us increase our pace. Faster, you tramps! You flea-ridden dogs! Why not? Moving fast made us a little warmer. The blood flowed more readily in our veins. We had the feeling of being alive. Faster, you filthy dogs! We were no longer marching. We were running, like automatons. The SS were running as well, weapons in hand. We looked as though we were running from them. The night was pitch black. From time to time, a shot exploded in the darkness. They had orders to shoot anyone who could not sustain the pace. Their fingers on the triggers, they did not deprive themselves of the pleasure. If one of us stopped for a second, a quick shot eliminated the filthy dog. I was putting one foot in front of the other, like a machine. I was dragging this emaciated body that was still such a weight. If only I could have shed it. Though I tried to put it out of my mind, I couldn't help thinking that there were two of us, my body and I. And I hated that body. I kept repeating to myself, don't think, don't stop, run. Near me, men were collapsing into the dirty snow. Gunshots. A young boy from Poland was marching beside me. His name was Zalman. He had worked in the electrical material depot at Buna. People mocked him because he was forever praying and meditating on some Talmudic question. For him, it was an escape from reality, from feeling the blows. All of a sudden, he had terrible stomach cramps. My stomach aches, he whispered to me. He couldn't go on. He had to stop a moment. I begged him, oh, wait a little, Zalman. Soon we will all come to a halt. We cannot run like this to the end of the world. But while running, he began to undo his buttons and yelled to me, I can't go on. My stomach is bursting. Make an effort, Zalman. Try. I can't go on. He groaned. He lowered his pants and fell to the ground. That is the image I have of him. I don't believe that he was finished off by an SS, for nobody had noticed. He must have died trampled under the feet of the thousands of men who followed us. I soon forgot him. I began to think of myself again. My foot was aching. I shivered with every step. Just a few more meters and we'll all be over. I'll fall. A red flame, a shot. Death enveloped me. It suffocated me. It stuck to me like glue. I felt I could touch it. The idea of dying, of ceasing to be, began to fascinate me. To no longer exist, to no longer feel the excruciating pain of my foot, to no longer feel anything, neither fatigue nor cold, nothing. To break rank, to let myself slide, to the side of the road. My father's presence was the only thing that stopped me. He was running next to me, out of breath, out of strength, desperate. I had no right to let myself die. What would he do without me? I was his sole support. These thoughts were going through my mind as I continued to run, not feeling my numb foot, not even realizing that I was still running. But I still owned a body that galloped down the road among thousands of others. When I became conscious of myself again, I tried to slow my pace somewhat, but there was no way. These human waves were rolling forward and would have crushed me like an ant. By now, I moved like a sleepwalker. I sometimes closed my eyes, and it was like running while asleep. Now and then, someone kicked me violently from behind, and I would wake up. The man in back of me was screaming, "Run faster! If you don't want to move, let us pass you!" But all I had to do was close my eyes to see the world pass before me, to dream another life. The road was endless. To allow oneself to be carried by the mob, to be swept away by blind fate. When the SS were tired, they were replaced. But no one replaced us. Chilled to the bone, our throats parched, famished, out of breath, we pressed on. We were the masters of nature, the masters of the world. We had transcended everything, death, fatigue, our natural needs. We were stronger than the cold and hunger, stronger than the guns and the desire to die, doomed and rootless, nothing but numbers. We were the only men on earth. At last, the morning star appeared in the gray sky. A hesitant light began to hover on the horizon. We were exhausted. We had lost all strength, all illusion. The commandant announced that we had already covered 20 kilometers since we first left. Long since, we had exceeded the limits of fatigue. Our legs moved mechanically in spite of us, without us. We came to an abandoned village, not a living soul, not a single bark, houses with gaping windows. A few people slipped out of the ranks, hoping to hide in some abandoned building. One more hour of marching, and at last the order to halt. As one man, we let ourselves sink into the snow. My father shook me. "Not here. Get up. A little farther down. There is a shed over there. Come." I had neither the desire nor the resolve to get up. Yet I obeyed. It was not really a shed, but a brick factory whose roof had fallen in. Its window panes were shattered, its walls covered in soot. It was not easy to get inside. Hundreds of prisoners jostled one another at the door. We finally succeeded in entering. Inside, too, the snow was thick. I let myself slide to the ground. Only now did I feel the full extent of my weakness. The snow seemed to me like a very soft, very warm carpet. I fell asleep. I don't know how long I slept, a few minutes or 1 hour. When I woke up, a frigid hand was tapping my cheeks. I tried to open my eyes. It was my father. How he had aged since last night. His body was completely twisted, shriveled up into himself. His eyes were glazed over, his lips parched, decayed. Everything about him expressed total exhaustion. His voice was damp from tears and snow. "Don't let yourself be overcome by sleep, Eliezer. It's dangerous to fall asleep in snow. One falls asleep forever. Come, my son, come. Get up." Get up? How could I? How was I to leave this warm blanket? I was hearing my father's words, but their meaning escaped me, as if he had asked me to carry the entire shed on my arms. "Come, my son, come." I got up with clenched teeth. Holding on to me with one arm, he led me outside. It was not easy. It was as difficult to go out as to come in. Beneath our feet there lay men, crushed, trampled underfoot, dying. Nobody paid attention to them. We were outside. The icy wind whipped my face. I was constantly biting my lips so that they wouldn't freeze. All around me, what appeared to be a dance of death. My head was reeling. I was walking through a cemetery. Among the stiffened corpses, there were logs of wood, not a sound of distress, not a plaintive cry, nothing but mass agony and silence. Nobody asked anyone for help. One died because one had to. No point in making trouble. I saw myself in every stiffened corpse. Soon I wouldn't even be seeing them anymore. I would be one of them. Matter of hours. Come, Father, let's go back to the shed. He didn't answer. He was not even looking at the dead. Come, Father, it's better there. You'll be able to lie down. We'll take turns. I'll watch over you, and you'll watch over me. We won't let each other fall asleep. We'll look after each other. He accepted. After trampling over many bodies and corpses, we succeeded in getting inside. We let ourselves fall to the ground. Don't worry, son. Go to sleep. I'll watch over you. You first, Father. Sleep. He refused. I stretched out and tried to sleep, to doze a little, but in vain. God knows what I would have given to be able to sleep for a few minutes. But deep inside, I knew that to sleep meant to die, and something in me rebelled against that death. Death, which settling in all around me, silently, gently, it would seize upon a sleeping person, steal into him, and devour him bit by bit. Next to me, someone was trying to awaken his neighbor, his brother perhaps, or his comrade. In vain. Defeated, he lay down too, next to the corpse, and also fell asleep. Who would wake him up? Reaching out with my arm, I touched him. Wake up. One mustn't fall asleep here. He half opened his eyes. No advice, he said, his voice a whisper. I'm exhausted. Mind your business. Leave me alone. My father, too, was gently dozing. I couldn't see his eyes. His cap was covering his face. Wake up, I whispered in his ear. He woke with a start. He sat up, bewildered, stunned, like an orphan. He looked all around him, taking it all in as if he had suddenly decided to make an inventory of his universe, to determine where he was and how and why he was there. Then he smiled. I shall always remember that smile. What world did it come from? Heavy snow continued to fall over the corpses. The door of the shed opened. An old man appeared. His mustache was covered with ice. His lips were blue. It was Rabbi Elihu, who had headed a small congregation in Poland. A very kind man, beloved by everybody in the camp, even by the capos and the Blachalteste. Despite the orders and deprivations, his face continued to radiate his innocence. He was the only rabbi whom nobody ever failed to address as rabbi in Buna. He looked like one of those prophets of old, always in the midst of his people when they needed to be consoled. And strangely, his words never provoked anyone. They did bring peace. As he entered the shed, his eyes, brighter than ever, seemed to be searching for someone. Perhaps someone here has seen my son. He had lost his son in the commotion. He had searched for him among the dying to no avail. Then he had dug through the snow to find his body. In vain. For 3 years they had stayed close to one another, side by side. They had endured the suffering, the blows. They had waited for their ration of bread, and they had prayed. 3 years, from camp to camp, from selection to selection. And now, when the end seemed so near, fate had separated them. When he came near me, Rabbi Elihu whispered, It happened on the road. We lost sight of one another during the journey. I fell behind a little, at the rear of the column. I didn't have the strength to run anymore. And my son didn't notice. That's all I know. Where has he disappeared? Where can I find him? Perhaps you've seen him somewhere. No, Rabbi Elihu, I haven't seen him. And so he left, as he had come, a shadow swept away by the wind. He had already gone through the door, when I remembered that I had noticed his son running beside me. I had forgotten, and so had not mentioned it to Rabbi Elihu. But then I remembered something else. His son had seen him losing ground, sliding back to the rear of the column. He had seen him, and he continued to run in front, letting the distance between them become greater. A terrible thought crossed my mind. What if he had wanted to be rid of his father? He had felt his father growing weaker, and believing that the end was near, had thought by this separation to free himself of a burden that could diminish his own chance for survival. It was good that I had forgotten all that, and I was glad that Rabbi Elihu continued to search for his beloved son. And in spite of myself, a prayer formed inside me, a prayer to this God in whom I no longer believed. Oh God, Master of the universe, give me the strength never to do what Rabbi Elihu's son has done. There was shouting outside in the courtyard. Night had fallen, and the SS were ordering us to form ranks. We started to march once more. The dead remained in the yard under the snow, without even a marker, like fallen guards. No one recited Kaddish over them. Sons abandoned the remains of their fathers without a tear. On the road it snowed and snowed. It snowed endlessly. We were marching more slowly. Even the guards seemed tired. My wounded foot no longer hurt, probably frozen. I felt I had lost that foot. It had become detached from me like a wheel fallen off a car. Never mind. I had to accept the fact I would have to live with only one leg. The important thing was not to dwell on it, especially now. Leave those thoughts for later. Our column had lost all appearance of discipline. Everyone walked as he wished, as he could. No more gunshots. Our guards surely were tired. But death hardly needed their help. The cold was consciously doing its work. At every step, somebody fell down and ceased to suffer. From time to time, the SS officers on motorcycles drove the length of the column to shake off the growing apathy. Hold on, we're almost there. Courage, just a few more hours. We're arriving in Gleiwitz. These words of encouragement, even coming, as they did, from the mouths of our assassins, were of great help. Nobody wanted to give up now, just before the end, so close to our destination. Our eyes searched the horizon for the barbed wire of Gleiwitz. Our only wish was to arrive there quickly. By now it was night. It had stopped snowing. We marched a few more hours before we arrived. We saw the camp only when we stood right in front of its gate. The capos quickly settled us into the barrack. There was shoving and jostling as if this were the ultimate heaven, the gateway to life. People trod over numbed bodies, trampled wounded faces. There were no cries, only a few moans. My father and I were thrown to the ground by this rolling tide. From beneath me came a desperate cry. You're crushing me! Have mercy! The voice was familiar. You're crushing me! Mercy! Have mercy! The same faint voice, the same cry I had heard somewhere before. This voice had spoken to me one day. When? Years ago? No. It must have been in the camp. Mercy! Knowing that I was crushing him, preventing him from breathing, I wanted to get up and disengage myself to allow him to breathe, but I myself was crushed under the weight of other bodies. I had difficulty breathing. I dug my nails into unknown faces. I was biting my way through, searching for air. No one cried out. Suddenly I remembered Julik, the boy from Warsaw who played the violin in the Buna orchestra. Julik, is that you? Eleazar. The 25 whiplashes, yes, I remember. He fell silent. A long moment went by. Julik, can you hear me, Julik? Yes, he said feebly. What do you want? He was not dead. Are you all right, Julik? I asked, less to know his answer than to hear him speak, to know he was alive. All right, Eleazar, all right. Not too much air, tired. My feet are swollen. It's good to rest, but my violin. thought he'd lost his mind. His violin? Here? What about your violin? He was gasping. I'm afraid. They'll break my violin. I brought it with me. I could not answer him. Someone had laid down on top of me, smothering me. I couldn't breathe through my mouth or nose. Sweat was running down my forehead and my back. This was it. The end of the road, a silent death, suffocation. No way to scream, to call for help. I tried to rid myself of my invisible assassin. My whole desire to live became concentrated in my nails. I scratched, I fought for a breath of air. I tore at decaying flesh that did not respond. I could not free myself of that mass weighing down my chest. Who knows? Was I struggling with a dead man? I shall never know. All I can say is that I prevailed. I succeeded in digging a hole in that wall of dead and dying people, a small hole through which I could drink a little air. Father, are you there? I asked as soon as I was able to utter a word. I knew he could not be far from me. Yes, a voice replied from far away, as if from another world. I'm trying to sleep. He was trying to sleep. Could one fall asleep here? Wasn't it dangerous to lower one's guard even for a moment, when death could strike at any time? Those were my thoughts when I heard the sound of a violin. A violin in a dark barrack where the dead were piled on top of the living? Who was this madman who played the violin here at the edge of his own grave? Or was it a hallucination? It had to be Julik. He was playing a fragment of a Beethoven concerto. Never before had I heard such a beautiful sound, in such silence. How had he succeeded in disengaging himself? To slip out from under my body without my feeling it? The darkness enveloped us. All I could hear was the violin, and it was as if Julik's soul had become his bow. He was playing his life. His whole being was gliding over the strings, his unfilled hopes, his charred past, his extinguished future. He played that which would never play again. I shall never forget Julik. How could I forget this concert, given before an audience of the dead and dying? Even today, when I hear that particular piece by Beethoven, my eyes close and out of the darkness emerges the pale and melancholy face of my Polish comrade, bidding farewell to an audience of dying men. I don't know how long he played. I was overcome by sleep. When I awoke at daybreak, I saw Julik facing me, hunched over, dead. Next to him lay his violin, trampled, an eerily poignant little corpse. We stayed in Gleiwitz for 3 days, days without food or water. We were forbidden to leave the barrack. The door was guarded by the SS. I was hungry and thirsty. I must have been very dirty and disheveled, to judge by what the others looked like. The bread we had brought from Buna had been devoured long since, and who knew when we would be given another ration? The front followed us. We could again hear the cannons very close by, but we no longer had the strength or the courage to think that the Germans would run out of time, that the Russians would reach us before we could be evacuated. We learned that we would be moved to the center of Germany. On the third day at dawn, we were driven out of the barrack. We threw blankets over our shoulders like prayer shawls. We were directed to a gate that divided the camp in two. A group of SS officers stood waiting. A word flew through our ranks. Selection. The SS officers were doing the selection. The weak to the left. Those who walked well to the right. My father was sent to the left. I ran after him. An SS officer shouted at my back, "Come back!" I inched my way through the crowd. Several SS men rushed to find me, creating such confusion that a number of people were able to switch over to the right, among them my father and I. Still, there were gunshots and some dead. We were led out of the camp. After a half-hour march, we arrived in the very middle of a field crossed by railroad tracks. This was where we were to wait for the train's arrival. Snow was falling heavily. We were forbidden to sit down or to move. A thick layer of snow was accumulating on our backs. We were given bread. the usual ration. We threw ourselves on it. Someone had the idea of quenching his thirst by eating snow. Soon we were all imitating him. As we were not permitted to bend down, we took out our spoons and ate the snow off our neighbors' backs. A mouthful of bread and a spoonful of snow. The SS men who were watching were greatly amused by the spectacle. The hours went by. Our eyes were tired from staring at the horizon, waiting for the liberating train to appear. It arrived only very late that evening, an infinitely long train composed of roofless cattle cars. The SS shoved us inside, 100 per car. We were so skinny. When everybody was on board, the convoy left. So as I have said before, my book that I kind of set everything up from is a little different from this text here, this PDF, and that's okay. But I'm pointing this out specifically because in this case it says, "You filthy dogs," and then eliminating the filthy dog, whereas mine has a slightly different translation. So let's take a look at that. Oh, all right. So here, I say all that, and then let's see here. Yeah, it's different. So this one actually doesn't even make sense. In my copy, it starts with one felt oneself reviving. This is a reflective pronoun. One. So sometimes we don't talk about ourselves. I could say, Mr. de Klerk felt himself feeling better, or I could just say, one felt one feeling better. Like, it's kind of a complicated, convoluted way, but usually we're just talking about ourselves in a slightly more general sense. Rather than my specific personal individual experience, it's my experience in a broader idea. So anyway, when you see someone using the word one as kind of that pronoun that referring to themselves, that's what's going on. All right. My translation says, "Faster, you filthy sons of bitches." Okay, which is interesting because then later on it says, "If one of us stopped for a second, a sharp shot finished off another filthy son of a bitch." I point this out. The PDF was filthy dogs, you filthy dogs, and then you filthy dogs. But all this to say, not that Elie Wiesel, the author, is calling themselves these names, dogs or sons of bitches. What he's doing is it's writing style. He's literally taking that quotation here and kind of using it in his own words, almost like that subtle hinting it, like, yeah, I know what you're saying about me, so I'm going to use those words just so you know that I know that you know that I know, right? So it doesn't really matter what words, whether it's dog or this son of a bitch, but I like the writing style of it, that reference to that same exact pattern, that same phrase. So just want to point that out. All right. Deprive means to withhold. So we kind of have a double negative here. So if it means to withhold, they did not withhold. That means they gave into it, right? To withhold is to keep it. To not withhold is to give it. So it means they gave themselves the pleasure of this. It says they did not deprive themselves of the pleasure of shooting someone falling behind. The rules are, if you fall behind, we shoot you. They took full advantage of it. So the point here is to be careful with the reading, looking at these sort of negative words, making sure you understand the vocabulary and how it works in the entire sentence. So, good critical reading. All right, we talked about that one. This one stands out to me just because death is all around. You're getting shot to the left. You might be putting in the furnace to the right. And here, you're literally getting trampled to death by thousands of other Jewish prisoners. And it's just tragic. There's just death of every kind. And as the reader, I'm kind of exhausted. Like, it is a weight. It is a burden for me to read this because it's sad and it's depressing. All right. Once again, another example of father-son relationship here, of how he says, "What would my father do without me? I'm the one supporting him." Often we think of it as our Father supporting us. But here the child is saying, my Father needs me. So they are working together. Okay, the PDF said something like kilometers, but this translation says 42 miles. They ran for 42 miles. I can't imagine running that far. I imagine they did stop and rest at times. I mean, they would have had to, I think. But still, over the course of a couple of days without stopping, that's crazy. All right. It says how old he had grown since the night before. What does that mean? Does it mean that he had grown 10 years in one night? Well, of course, it's talking about just the physical aging. When you've got no food, no sleep, and you're cold and you're miserable and your skin tightens and your eyes look dark and you just look physically older. So he didn't actually get older overnight. He just looks like it. But it's said as if it's a fact, as if it is the simple truth. All right, you might sleep for good. What does that mean? Well, sleep is often a euphemism for death. So he's saying, wake up, because if you fall asleep, you will die. You will never wake up again. All right, death all around us. And yet, Ellie says, and something within me revolted against this death. He's crying out, life! I want to live. How wonderful that is to be reminded that life is valuable. You can't go through a book of death without being aware that the opposite of death is life. And if death is so horrible and so miserable, then that makes life so good. So I just say, you guys, when your life is really tough and you're struggling, there is joy to be found. And we've seen it even in these pages. If nothing else, this book can remind us of how in horrible tragedies we can still find beautiful truths worth living for. So even when you're sad and depressed and upset and you feel alone, find some joy. It's there somewhere. You just have to look for it. Find a reason to live. Something within him revolted. He had every reason. He's exhausted. He's starving. He's been just tortured. Lay down, fall asleep in the snow, and die. No one will blame you. And he says, you know what? No! Something deep within my soul says, that's wrong. I want to live. Life is worth living. See? His father smiles at him. Says, I shall always remember that smile. What world did that smile come from? Because this is a world of misery. He smiles at me. My father smiles at me. Helps give me that reason to continue living. All right, a contrast. Ellie and his father have really, worked to stay together this whole time. But then we get this little interlude, this little story about how the rabbi's son saw his father and kind of kept going and separated from him. And it's heartbreaking. On one hand, Ellie gives him credit in saying, look, it's every man for himself. It's survival of the fittest. You can't take care of someone old and haggard and dying. He says, on the other hand, oh my gosh, to leave and abandon your own father? He says, there is a prayer that just came out of me. And he says, may I please never be like that. So he still desperately clings to his father, even though that loving of your father and protecting your father might actually bring about your own death. He says, may I never be like them. So we get this contrasting father-son relationship. All right, critical reading. It says, the foot was lost to me. It had detached itself from my body like a wheel of a car. Too bad. I should have to resign myself. I could live with only one leg. Did he really lose a leg? So what's going on here? No, he did not lose a leg. But what he is saying is that his body had stopped registering the pain. He couldn't even feel it anymore. And so he imagines that maybe it's, frostbite or whatever, but he's imagining what life will be like once that leg does get cut off. But as far as I know, that didn't actually happen to the author. He's saying just the pain was so gone. I couldn't even feel it anymore. It just wasn't even there, which is dangerous. But 3 days without food and drink, oh my gosh, to already be starving and go that long without eating or drinking, it's a wonder that anyone survived at all. Okay, father-son relationship. My father was sent to the left. I ran after him. I point this out because I think it's brave, because we see in just a few sentences it says, some shots and some dead. Ellie, when he ran, he created this confusion and people are trying to escape and run away. And then the SS starts shooting people, pa, pa, pa. It was brave. He went after his father. And then they were able to survive. But it's also tragic because people died because of it. But he risked his life to be with his dad. I have been told that this is actually a picture of Ellie. I don't know if that's true, but this is a picture from some of the Holocaust survivors. You can see their ribs. You can see how incredibly thin they are. You can see their bodies down here, and this man's face is the skull bone there. It's pretty intense. This man down here, my goodness, it's just tough. That's brutal. All right, I know that was kind of a long one, but thanks for paying attention. Talk to you later. Bye now.